Good morning. It's May 31st, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily live show. We run Monday to Friday, 11:30 till around 1 o'clock usually. We have some interesting guests and some ranting of mine, which can be interesting or dull depending on the day or how worked up I might be. So let's see. We got people tuning in from all over. We do have a lot to cover today. Let's start with those daily observances, though. Find out what's important, what you got to make sure to be watching for today and what's happening out there. It is Necrotizing Fasciitis Awareness Day. You don't want to forget this one. For those not familiar with that one, that's that nasty flesh-eating disease. It used to be much more prominent in the news for a while. It's even almost trendy, actually. It's kind of a scary thought. You get a small cut, you get an infection, and it just sort of eats you. It cost Lucien Bouchard his leg in the past, if I recall. Either way, it's kind of a grisly observance, but it really is Necrotizing Fasciitis Awareness Day, so I wouldn't want you guys to go through a day without knowing that. It's also World Parrot Day. So if you've got a parrot, or if you want a parrot, or if you just like parrots, this is the day to admire them, observe them, take advantage of them. I don't know, whatever you do with a parrot. Of course, teach it to swear or whatever you're going to do. Have some fun with it. Now, it turns out there was a bit of controversy. I'd also announced that yesterday was Hug Your Cat Day, and we got corrected. Apparently, I've been spreading fake news. Now, you see, I get my daily observances from one site, but in searching, apparently Hug Your Cat Day is on June 14th. It is listed on the other site as well. It's the only solution I can see for that, though, and I apologize for having mischaracterized the day and perhaps put out the wrong information on Hug Your Cat Day. You are allowed to hug your cat more than once, or if your cat's a miserable beast like that thing that lives in my house, just still remain with not hugging it whatsoever. But your official Hug Your Cat Day will be on June 4th. Sorry if I'd had people's cats inadvertently hugged on the wrong day. Perhaps they only allow it on one day of the year, and they got it on the wrong one. So my apologies to all the cats and cat huggers and scratched people out there. Okay, let's see, getting on to who we've got today. I got a couple of good guests, actually. Matt Hatfield from OpenMedia. They're an organization that specializes in watching for internet privacy, data breaches, and of course, transparency, free speech. And there was quite a story with the Globe and Mail broke it. I gotta give credit to the Toronto Globe when it's due, with a lot of data from students, because all that online learning and all those apps, well, it turns out, including it through a CBC app, the old state broadcaster, Canadian students, kids, were having their data shared and sold to private operators. So your kid's not just going to school, those advertisers are sucking in data on them and targeting them for future sales or social engineering or who knows what. So that'll be a good conversation. Professor Tom Flanagan is going to be back on. He's been on before, and we are going to follow up further again as we spoke. We've published a number of stories, just trying to have a more nuanced and deeper discussion on what's going on with these residential school alleged burial sites, or some are burial sites, but they were known burial sites. And we've talked about it for quite a while. But now the mainstream has finally picked up on it. There's big stories have been coming out in the National Post and in the Washington Post, I believe. The discussion's opening up because it sounds like there was a lot of misinformation surrounding that whole affair. And we really should get to the bottom of it. I mean, this is something we shook up the whole nation with for months. I mean, we lowered our flag for half a year. So Professor Flanagan's going to come on and we're going to discuss that. All right, so let me get on to what I usually get on about. Whatever the news stories are. And of course, yesterday, the big one was Trudeau's big firearms control announcement. So, I mean, never once to let a good tragedy go to waste, the Trudeau Liberals have chosen this week to drop legislation cracking down on law-abiding firearm owners. It's no coincidence that this legislation happens to be presented just after the horrific school massacre in Texas last week. I mean, legislation like this takes time to draft and prepare. The Liberal firearm bill, it clearly has just been sitting ready and waiting for a terrible firearm incident to happen so they could take advantage of the public sentiment of the time. Now, if crime due to legally owned handguns in Canada really was an immediate and pressing problem, shouldn't the Liberals put this forward long ago? I mean, they had this legislation in the can, but they waited until it was politically expedient before going after handguns. The political future of the Trudeau government is a higher priority than public safety, and this proves it. Now, this proposed legislation is a solution seeking a problem. Shootings are indeed rising in urban areas across Canada, and citizens are rightly concerned about it. And when we're looking at over 90% of the cases of handgun crimes in Canada, though, it involves an illegal handgun that's been smuggled in from the United States. In many of the other cases, the guns were stolen from somebody. Crimes committed by law-abiding, licensed, and registered handgun owners in Canada are statistically insignificant. Yet this is who the Trudeau government is targeting with this legislation. It's political virtue signaling on a grand scale, and it's not making anybody any safer. With legal registered handguns, the majority of fatalities they have caused, because there's some numbers in there, they like pointing to them, but those were suicides. If we want to try and reduce suicides, I'm all for it. Let's spend more money on mental health supports and treatment. Banning handguns won't do any better than banning ropes, though. If somebody really wants to do themselves in, unfortunately, they will find a way. Canada is drafting legislation in response to American culture wars that we aren't experiencing up here. We don't have a rash of mass or school shootings based on the easy acquisition of legal firearms. Most of our shootings are gang-related, and they almost never use legal firearms. And looking at the American efforts to quell gun violence through firearm restrictions, we can see a prime example of its failure in Chicago. Chicago implemented a gun ban and had some of the most restrictive firearm policies in the whole United States. The shootings in Chicago have only risen, with a shocking 3,561 of them in 2021. Unimaginable. More than, they were getting around 10 a day, and it contributed to 797 homicides. And this is where they've got the strongest firearm control legislation in the United States. Now, some apologists for Chicago's gun control failure lay the blame on the guns coming from neighboring states. Well, that demonstrates the futility of local controls. Most of Canada's illegal guns are coming from the USA, and our border is 8,900 kilometers long. Smugglers have been using drones to fly handguns over that border. How is banning legal handgun ownership going to stop this? Canada has nearly 1 million legally owned handguns, at least for now. We're actually one of the most highly armed civilian populations on Earth. Our handguns are highly regulated, and our culture is much different than our southern cousins when it comes to them. They just don't present a problem up here. During the announcement of the new regulations, Trudeau's lineup made the claim that this ban would make women safer. Again, legally owned handguns have not traditionally been a weapon of choice in the harm or murder of women. Indeed, a woman who owns a legal handgun is likely safer than many others. If we want to make women safer, we should be locking up our violent criminals. As I wrote recently, in less than a year in Alberta alone, 3 young women were murdered by repeat violent offenders. One of the offenders shot a 23-year-old Calgarian mother. He had a long criminal history, and hey, guess what? He was banned from possessing guns. It didn't stop him. Another mother of 5 was killed in a car accident as a gangster with no less than 6 attempted murders under his belt in Canada was chasing down a car and shooting at it. He had been banned from owning guns as well. It's almost as if the criminals don't care. The third one didn't use a gun to commit the horrific crime he did against a mother and child in Alberta, but he also had a long history of violent offenses. No gun laws would have prevented these murders. Keeping these known violent criminals in jail would have, though. And we had them, and we let them out, and they killed people. That's where we have a problem. Let's not pretend for a second that Trudeau is intent on stopping with just banning the legal sale of handguns. He's ideologically driven and desperate for a legacy he can claim after his lackluster term as a prime minister. Trudeau will move on to full-out handgun bans soon, and likely will turn his eyes towards long guns as well. The outcome isn't important to him, only the impression he hopes to make. If we want to fight violent crimes, it's going to take a complicated, difficult, and multifaceted approach. Unfortunately, we have a simplistic, one-dimensional prime minister who prefers surfing over heavy lifting. He would rather appear to be doing something than have to do all the work to actually accomplish something. If we want to save lives in Canada, we should be tackling the growing opioid addiction crisis. It's killing thousands of Canadians every year, far more than firearms are. And the illicit trade of the drugs is what's fueling the violent gang wars. Again, though, that's too tough a nut for our current prime minister to try and crack. Gun smugglers and gangsters are smiling today as the Canadian government sets its sights on law-abiding citizens while barely touching the illegal gun trade. All this is going to do is make Canada a little less free and no safer. All right, let's check into the newsroom with Dave Naylor. That's our news editor here at the Western Standard. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
It's going good, Cory. Hey, look, you got to promise me every time you let Duke the Wonder Dog out now, you're going packing. You're going armed, because I understand there might be some drama going on out there.
Well, I was telling Nico, just out of annoyance, actually, last night I went out and fired off a few shots at the old 22. A flower planter was the victim of my high crime there back in the woods. I didn't have a good target handy. And Duke absolutely despises even a little bit of the sound of that thing, and he is gone immediately. So I don't think packing with Duke is going to help.
Well, aren't we the missing dog, though, right? With one of the hopefully hasn't fallen victim to one of the creatures of the night.
No, yeah, there is one missing in Prentice. Hopefully he's just hiding somewhere. But they tend to get eaten in our neck of the woods once in a while.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Anyways, big story this morning that had all the women in the newsroom squealing, and apparently your wife too, that Kevin Costner is coming to town. He's been named the Grand Marshal of the Calgary Stampede Parade on July 8th. So that's got everybody very excited. He's obviously one of the biggest stars in the world right now with Yellowstone, and he's got some fairly good movies under his belt. So good on the Stampede to try and get more back and focused on modern day life. The gun debate is dominating the news headlines again today, Cory. We got a column from David Creighton just on how Trudeau is shamelessly exploiting the gun tragedy down in Texas, and it's not really going to do anything about crime in Canada. And right next to that, we've got a story about a 15-year-old boy in Toronto. He was arrested facing multiple charges, and there was handguns involved there. So lots of gun stuff today. We got a column written by a fellow called Cory Morgan talking about healthcare spending, and doesn't matter how much money you throw at the problem, it's not going to fix the broken system. We got a column up by our Linda Slobodian on the problems with the cash questions and when you can use cash to buy UCP leadership or become a member of the party to vote for the UCP leadership. And speaking of that, we're moments away from having Travis Taves, the current finance minister, announce his bid for the leadership. Apparently, he resigned as finance minister this morning. He's going to be having a press conference in about 20 minutes in Grand Prairie, and that'll lead to a cabinet shuffle later on this afternoon, I'm thinking, because somebody's going to have to replace Travis Taves as finance minister, and the money seems to be on Tyler Shandro, who's a close confidant of Jason Kenney. So lots of political intrigue coming up this afternoon, Cory.
Great. Well, political intrigue is our trade here, along with news and other items. So yeah, we'll be watching that one closely for sure.
And just to mention, Rob here, sitting beside me, says he's never seen your hair so bouffant.
Well, thanks. Yes, I am a little overdue for a trim here, but yeah, the old wiry grays are really puffing up nicely.
You're rocking it, man.
Great. Thanks, Dave. All right. I'll talk to you later. So yes, lots in the news, Cooker guys, always stuff breaking, always stuff going. And as we said, Linda and Rachel are really both watching closely and reporting on the ongoing, news as it breaks with the UCP and their leadership and what's happening there. Just that reminder to everybody, all of those stories, those columns we were talking about, even that one from that Morgan guy, it's all available on the Western Standard site if you've got a subscription. And the subscribers are the reason we can do this, the reason we don't pander to the federal government or any government, because we don't take tax dollars. We rely on you guys. So those who have subscribed, again, I can never thank you guys enough. It's really important for all of us. We kind of pay for our own, and that way we get good, unimpeded, independent media. And if you haven't subscribed already, jump on board, guys. $99 for a year, $10 if you want to go month per month. And you get full, unfettered access to all of those columns, all those breaking stories. We aren't like some sites that'll just cut and paste news stories in. We've got a bevy of reporters, Amanda, Mel, Reed, Matthew, you name it. It's hard. It's too long to list anymore. When we started this show, I could kind of list them off with 5 or 6. And no, we got people all across the country. And it's thanks to you guys and your subscriptions, and we really appreciate it. So get on there and take out a subscription, guys. Less than an old newspaper one was. And it's an investment in news for yourself, and it's also an investment with us. So yes, lots breaking as Dave had mentioned. Yes, I noticed Jane had a little more bounce in her step this morning. I wish I could take credit for that, but no, not in that case. It's because she'd found out that Kevin Costner is going to be heading the Stampede Parade this year in Calgary. And from what I've seen on Twitter and that, quite a few Calgarian ladies are quite happy and looking forward to that. For those who haven't watched Yellowstone, it's been quite a hit. If you want to see a cross between a run-of-the-mill Western and Sons of Anarchy, that's kind of what you got there. And it is quite a show, and it's been very popular, and of course, particularly out here in the West. And I think, to give credit where it's due, the Stampede board, I criticize them a lot because I think for the most part they're a bunch of dorks. But they made a really good choice, just in timeliness. He's big in the news. It's what was I saying? Western themed. It fits with the Stampede because we've had a lot of weird parade marshals and people coming out that. Hey, good on them, but it doesn't really reflect what the Stampede crowd is. And we haven't had a good Stampede in years, thanks to the pandemic and restrictions and everything else. So yeah, having Costner headed up, that was a good call. And it sounds like it's going to be pulling some people out to the parade who haven't seen one of these parades in many years. So I expect the kids are going to have a hard time watching the parade this year because they're going to have to be peeking around between the legs of a large lineup of middle-aged ladies lined up and throwing their undies at Mr. Costner as he tours or something. But we'll see. Somebody commenting also, Scott, you're having trouble logging in. Send an email. I don't do the tech stuff, I'm afraid. Send an email to info@ and they'll fix you up. They can do it. There's a few people have had a few things they got to change with the new website in order to get logged in, and they're typically pretty easy fixes. I'm afraid I can't, I don't know what they are. I can't list them on here. That's not my turf. So getting provincial, let's talk about that for a moment. Yes, we've got, as we say, Taze has entered the race for the UCP. That's the one kind of everybody's anticipated. He's the finance minister, or was, and he's stepped down from it. So he will be the establishment candidate. That's the one from the Kenney government. There's always one, and the more the merrier. This race, so that kind of will make it 3 people who've officially declared for it. Again, for people looking for something different, well, they're going to have to look farther. But you've got, Danielle Smith and Brian Jean, who already led parties in the past. They're trying to make a comeback, and now we've got Travis Taze, who's he's a solid, steady guy. We talked about him on the pipeline last Wednesday, and he's the establishment candidate. He's part of the Kenney government, and that comes with some baggage. There's no doubt about that. The Kenney government isn't necessarily the most popular one you want to be aligned with. I mean, they just threw out their own leader, so that might not be the endorsement you want on the way in. And Premier Kenney hasn't endorsed anybody, but he will be viewed as the establishment candidate. We'll see how that works. And it's funny, he's different. He comes in under the radar. He's soft. He's been on this show before. He's a calmly spoken guy. He's pretty steady. Maybe that's what Albertans want right now. Maybe they want to break from trying to go for flash and noise. I don't know. We'll see. As we brought up, a lot of the ministers, for example, that carry a lot of the baggage from Kenney was with the whole Sky Palace thing that really embarrassed the government while everybody was locked down and they were out on the Sky Palace of all places having a drink and so on. And people remember that Kenney was there and Tyler Shandro, and they remember that Jason Nixon was among them, but nobody remembers that Taze was there. I had forgotten that he was in that mix even. So he kind of slides under the radar. Don't underestimate him. So the race is developing. I mean, they haven't even come up with the rules yet. Some of the things that are of concern, so that they won't, and I'm kind of mixed on it, they won't allow the cash sale of memberships anymore. It has to be purchased with a credit card or debit or some form of thing. It's going to be a pain for some people. Some people really like dealing with cash, but this is a way. There's been so much mistrust, there's been so much ugly political play already with memberships and things, bulk buying and stuff like that. This will help, I think, bring in a little more confidence in that entire race. Things will be trackable, traceable, because this party really needs to regain trust. No matter who wins that leadership, they've got to show that this was a legitimate race. There's still questions being asked about the race that Kenney ran in years ago when he took the leadership. The party can't afford to have a bunch of people questioning the process again in this one. And I think the party headquarters have recognized that. So they brought in a rule saying, look, we're not going to take cash purchases and memberships. We've got to track all these memberships in this. It's too important. And you'll just have to work with that. But it's good to see they're recognizing the difficulties in coming with their past activities. Maybe this party's going to fix itself. They got a lot to cover in a short period of time, because we're looking at a general election possibly in, it's going to be in a year. And with a 6-month leadership race, this party does not have a lot of time to get it together. So they got to get the trust. That's the big word. It's not policy so much. I keep saying that all the time. The important thing is making sure people feel these are a government of legitimate people who are looking out for their interests. Okay, before I get to my guest, I see him in the lobby. Of course, I'll speak to the other thing that helps us pay our bills. And speaking of going cashless, and that's a sponsor of ours it's been a good solid one for a long time now, and that's Bitcoin Well. They are a Western Canadian company. They're based out here in the West, but they operate across Canada. They're publicly traded, and they are trustworthy. Speaking of trust, again, that's the main thing. If you're looking into something new, something different, there's a million online services and things that always seem to be trying to rip you off. Half your emails are phishing scams, and phone calls come in for duct cleaning that are trying to empty your wallet instead of your air ducts. Well, Bitcoin Well is a good, solid, reputable company. They offer personalized one-on-one service. If you're looking to get into Bitcoin, set up an appointment. You can sit face-to-face with a real person and discuss your investment, or you can do it virtually as well. And they have all sorts of resources on their website to help facilitate you if you choose to. Maybe it's not for you. I mean, it's the place to start to look into how it works, because they're a very deep site that gives you all of that information. So if you're considering getting into digital currencies and finding ways to make it practical for yourself, check out bitcoinwell.com and take control of your money. Okay, let's get on to our guest. Speaking of data and digital and all that good stuff in this new world that we're going on to, this is Matt Hatfield of the OpenMedia. I think I got that name right. Yes. We're sorry about that, Matt. And we were going to talk about some data sharing on a Globe and Mail story recently and some other things. So thanks and welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
So I'll kind of, maybe if you could describe what OpenMedia is and what your organization is about before we get into some of the more specific stories.
Sure. So we're a grassroots advocacy group. We've got over 300,000 community members, and we're united by the desire for an internet that's free, accessible, open, and surveillance-free. And we do most of our work here in Canada, a little bit of work in the US as well. And we're strictly nonpartisan. We're not aligned with any of the parties.
Excellent. And I mean, it is such a fluid and changing world. You know, the internet is moving along. And as fast as there's advancements in the internet, it seems like there's also people who want to control it or abuse it or take advantage of it. And I guess that's part of what you watch for. I mean, data is everything. And particularly with marketing or with pretty much any even government activities, things they might want to do if you're studying. And something that broke and what made me seek you guys out on this was that Globe and Mail story that students with online learning, it sounds like they've been basically capturing their data and sharing that to marketers.
That's right. So this is a pretty shocking story for a lot of people to realize that children were being having their data gathered by quite a few different learning apps that were in use. So CBC Kids is one of the ones that's sort of most egregious. It's actually used as a case study in Human Rights Watch's report for how badly it was abusing kids' data. But it's unfortunately just sort of pulling the curtain off and showing people how much all of our data is being gathered and abused by the apps that we use every day on our digital devices.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I mean, didn't even realize this. I always like to bring up even older examples they didn't understand. They were worried about their privacy. I say, well, do you have an Air Miles card? Yes. Well, do you understand why they give you these discounts? It's not so much your shopping. It's just because you're sharing all of that data with your age, your demographic, where you shop, what you're buying, what time. It's very, very important to marketers, and people share that without knowing it. But what risks are there in sharing data like this? I guess that's part of it. Some people say, well, it's harmless, but is it?
Well, it's not harmless, but you're unlikely to experience a direct, sharp effect in your daily life, which I think is why it feels harmless for people. I think what's really concerning about the way the modern data broker economy works is like this data is gathered by apps that seem very benign, but it is used and resold in a third-party economy in which much less benign companies could acquire that data. So there was kind of an incredible story The Intercept did, excuse me, last month, where they actually revealed that a private surveillance company was actually able to use this data broker economy to surveil CIA agents and to gather a lot of information about their movements. Any of us could be targeted in this way. Of course, you and I in our daily lives are unlikely to face like that very high level of scrutiny. But it is stripping us of our right to privacy in a fundamental sense that I don't think anyone in Canada should be comfortable with.
Yeah, well, and we're talking about, I mean, young students having basically kind of a file being built for them each. And, you know, as they move forward in life, I mean, some of them are going to be our future leaders. Some are going to be in sensitive positions. It isn't necessarily to anybody's benefit for that sort of data to be going around all over the place. And it's not just the first user. I mean, data gets sold and resold, right?
That's exactly right. So you might start by getting your app taken by CBC Kids or by a weather app. And you think, well, you know, I mean, what's a weather company really going to do with my data? Surely it couldn't be that bad. But their whole model, the reason you're getting this weather service for free is they will gather this personal information about you and they'll sell it to anyone who'll buy it. Technically, it's supposed to have some of the personal information removed from it. But the reality is if I'm a hostile actor, if I'm gathering data from your weather app and another app and another app, I can actually assemble a lot of stuff that tells me a lot about what you personally are up to in your life that, you and I probably wouldn't be comfortable with a company having that kind of information on us.
Yeah. So how do we stop this though? I mean, I can understand there's some degree of personal responsibility with grown people. Choose what you're going to register for and where you're going to share your data and things like that. But in this case, I think part of why people got as upset as they did is this was students in school unknowingly. You would think this is an area where it's going to be immune from that sort of thing. Is there a way we can prevent this from happening in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it stands out to people because kids are obviously, they can't be expected to know how they're making themselves vulnerable and participating in these apps. But none of us really know all of the different ways that apps are tracking us and drawing information from us. Nobody is able to read all of the agreements that we have to click through to get our daily business done. And what we really need here is much stronger privacy protections entrenched in law for kids and for all the rest of us. It's something we've been calling on in our community from the government for a long time. We got our first look at privacy reform in 2020 when the government proposed a reform to PIPEDA, the main law that governs how private companies use our data. Unfortunately, it was a very weak effort at reform. There was a lot of loopholes in it, and the government didn't really make a serious effort to pass it. They let it die. There was no real, it didn't reach committee, no real attempts to reform and get it into law. And they need to do better. So Minister Champagne from industry has said that it's one of his top priorities. We're waiting to see whether he's actually going to do it, and whether he's going to be listening to these companies that want to keep making money from our data, or whether he's going to take real meaningful action to protect Canadians.
Yeah, well, and again, it doesn't matter which party. It always kind of comes down to, and I'll believe it when I see it, sort of scenario. I mean, if a government's if they want to get something done, they typically will push it through pretty quickly. If they really want it. So I guess you just got to keep pushing and trying to encourage them and making sure that issue doesn't die. I would hope that this particular story lit a little more fire under their butts and make them take this a little more seriously.
I certainly hope so as well.
So going further then, into what your organization does, because I'm quite interested in that, and that impacts us a lot too. You talk about a lot of not just privacy, but access to data or access to the internet and things such as that. And your organization has been quite outspoken, as have we, with things such as Bill C11 and C18, where we're looking at controlling information, not so much gathering it, but controlling what we can or can't see. Which concerns have you guys raised with perhaps each bill in turn?
Right. So Bill C11, the Online Streaming Act, is an attempt to reform the law around our Broadcasting Act, and the idea is to include streaming companies within it. Unfortunately, the way the government is going about it, they've actually shoehorned in, giving the CRTC the power to regulate a lot of the audiovisual, podcast, video content that ordinary Canadians might put on the internet. All of that is technically within the CRTC's regulatory control under this bill. Now, we don't think that's necessarily the government intentionally trying to create a giant censorship regime. But whether they intend to or not, the power is there, and we don't think that's a safe power to be giving government.
No, and we're at a time where well-trusted government in general, I was kind of talking about that before you came on. I mean, whether you like this particular one or another is not really at a high point. So, I mean, the more protections we could have or more clarity on these things, I think people feel a little more comfortable with these legislations.
That's right. And in terms of Bill C18, that's an attempt to create a new compensation scheme for news. We don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to have some public support for news because, as you I'm sure are aware, it's difficult to make a good living making quality news these days. But we do think the way the government is doing it with Bill C18 is really, really misguided. So it's founded on a qualification scheme for being vetted by the government for whether you're making quality news or not. And there's just no transparency into that scheme. We don't know how decisions are made. We don't know who is in or out. And in the case of Bill C18, will require news organizations and online platforms to make a deal for financial support. There's also absolutely no information about what those deals will look like. So again, we don't know who will have a deal, what the terms are, what the expectations are. It's really frustrating to have this very low level of public accountability over something that matters to people a lot. I mean, the news is very important.
Yeah, and that qualification setup they have, I mean, credit where due with Canada Land, for example, they really dug in and exposed and spoke to one of the committee members. I guess I'll give her credit for coming on, but she didn't really expose, well, what are the qualifications? What do you look at? What do you do to choose where you pull the trigger as to who is a qualified or not qualified organization? And if the government has that ability, and we are, as alternative media, dependent on these social media giants, we can't reach the broader audience without that access. Again, it gets dangerous if the government starts to pick and choose which outlets can or can't. I mean, It's not to say it's being done or that's their intention, but ostensibly a government could say, well, I don't like their slant or that candidate they spoke to or whatever, and we're going to yank their qualifications.
Yeah, any consideration that important needs to be done in front of people in Canada. We need to see how the decisions are made, and have the opportunity to judge whether they're being made in a fair, impartial way. It's not appropriate for there to be a secret process for selecting who does the news.
And it's kind of backwards, I think, in some sense. I had Michael Geist on talking about that. He's done a lot of fantastic work, of course, in internet privacy issues and such as well. And but it kind of puts the screws to the big internet heavyweights. And I know a lot of people don't feel a lot of sympathy for Facebook or Google, but in reality, they shouldn't have to pay money just to have a link posted on their site. And that's kind of what this calls for. If you're going to link to a news, I mean, it's one thing to publish a whole news story and try and get advertising revenue from that. But this is a case of them just linking to those stories. They're actually kind of providing a service to the outlets in the first place. And we're going to try and charge them to provide a service. And this can't be good.
Professor Geist is completely right about that. I mean, very few people have that much sympathy for, Facebook or Google. So that's not the core of our argument around it. But no, there's no actual rationale for this way of seeking funding. And the trouble with doing it this way is it will make it actually beneficial for platforms to try to avoid sharing quality news. So C18 tries to say that, they're not allowed to do that. But there's a lot of things that companies can quietly do to discourage people from sharing quality news articles on their platforms. And that's a real problem. We need quality journalism to spread as far and wide. That's actually one of the problems with the modern internet.
Well, that's it too. So, I mean, non-qualifying, or perhaps just there's, an unprincipled outlet or something like that is prone to having an agenda or spreading fake information. Well, they're going to be able to play victim, build their underground viewership. And I mean, they'll still get around, but it'll be more unregulated, and the adherence to it won't be getting information from other places. Like the bottom, I don't know, I think we're kind of in agreement. It leaves personal responsibility to people, but you just got to kind of let all the information get out there, and we got to work to determine the accurate stuff from the inaccurate. And it can be hard and overwhelming, but it's better than getting the government to start trying to get in and pick and choose what we can see or hear.
For sure.
Great. So what other initiatives is your organization working on right now? I just in that whole field alone, I imagine you're very busy.
Well, it's a busy year, and the more the government does things, the busier we get. But really, we're always looking to try to address the imbalance between companies and governments and individual people, individual Canadians. So it's our sense that in the digital world, increasingly, the scales are tilted more and more towards large organizations, whether that's government or companies. And we just provide lots of ways for people to get their voices out there. All of our tools that send messages to policymakers, you can edit the message, you can add your own thoughts, you can disagree with us if you want. We're really trying to encourage democratic participation in every way we can, and to inform people about how important some of these digital issues are. So, of course, in Canada, one of the big questions that's under consideration right now is the Roger Shaw buyout deal. And behind that, of course, will be our Competition Act and trying to get reforms to our Competition Act to better support market competition in Canada in the future.
Great. Yeah. And I mean, it's important to have sites like yourself, or even, as you said, with Professor Geist. I mean, it's also a bit of a nebulous and convoluted and kind of wonky world somewhat. And having somebody, I guess, kind of dig into it and translate it for your average viewer is important. So they're informed and they know what's going on in a nutshell and can go deeper should they choose to with the information there.
That's exactly right. And, on something like Competition Act reform, it sounds quite wonky, quite nerdy, not something that people are excited about. But when you talk about fairness, when you talk about not letting monopolies, run this country, not letting them decide so many things that they do increasingly decide for ordinary Canadians, people care a lot about that side of the conversation.
Well, it's very important work. So, I appreciate what you guys are doing and shedding light on this and being nonpartisan. I'm a very partisan individual. I'm not with a party, but I've got my opinions. But, having a sources where you can look into and just get a balance on the policies and the views is really important and appreciated. So just one more time, is it openmedia.org?
That's right. Yeah. And encourage everyone to come and join, be part of our community.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming to join us today, Matt, and hope we can talk again sometime soon and we get some success in pushing back against some of this incursions on our privacy.
It's our pleasure. You take care.
Great. Thank you. So that was Matt Hatfield. I'm not sure why I'm having difficulty with that one today, and it's a simple one. And that is with openmedia.org. Let's see. Chris, okay, let's have some talk. Chris Everett saying, wonder if Western Standard is going to start reading these chats. So I'm reading it right now. There's more truth-telling in the chat. Maybe Western Standard needs to dig in a lot deeper still. Well, share what you got, man. That's what it's there for. And I appreciate it. I appreciate feedback. That's what the chat window is for, as long as we're being, civil and polite with each other. That's the advantage of being live. Some of it too, though, as you see, my head kind of goes back and forth, is I try not to look too hard at the chat while I'm talking with a guest, because it's kind of impolite and I might not hear exactly what they're saying. But I've gotten some fantastic stuff from the chat, of course, from people bringing up prospective guests or questions or ideas I wouldn't have thought of in the interview. And I appreciate you putting them up there. I mean, again, I've even had some nice little spats with the people putting things up in the chat. That's part of the fun as well. And you can discuss with each other. It's a great opportunity with this kind of platform. The old days of talk radio, you get people phoning in, things like that. In this case, we got a chat window, and as long as people aren't spamming it or being abusive, they can go for it. But I do read them, I do watch them, and I don't react to every one of them. I only have so much time and so on. But by all means, use that chat option, and let's keep a discussion going. That's the thing. That's the advantage of live. I assure you, my world, Nico's world, everybody's world will be a heck of a lot easier if we were actually a recorded show, and we could schedule and record interviews and things like that. But the live part, the interactivity, is what's important, taking things as they break and as they go. So keep the comments coming, and we'll keep fine tuning and going as we do. So let's get into a little more news. Actually, no, I'm going to speak to one of my sponsors before I get there. Okay, let's get there. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. The head of them is Tony Bernardo, by the way, and he's been a good advocate for firearms, responsible, safe use of firearms. That's the big thing that has to be distinguished. People sometimes, particularly people who don't own firearms, and that's fine, but we seem to forget, and it's something we're all bad for with human nature. We got to remember, just because that person wants to do it, but I don't do it, I still should stand up and protect their right to do it. And a lot of people, they're urban living, they don't utilize firearms, they aren't tools within their lives, and that's perfectly fine as well. But they often think, well, I don't need it, so why would anybody else? Well, don't think that way. It's not right. It's not good for you. Criminal use of firearms, legal firearms, see, they don't make the news. You don't hear about the millions of responsible firearm owners in Canada because they don't commit crimes with them. But they're all out there. They're all over the place. They're all around you. I don't want to make people feel paranoid. But the firearms are everywhere. Canada is actually one of the most highly civilian armed countries on the planet. We're second as far as developed countries after the United States for civilians being armed. People don't realize that. But thankfully, we don't have those crime levels. Either way, part of it is because of organizations like the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. This is where firearms owners or aspiring firearms owners can network. This is where you can get information on responsible use of firearms, on events, on things you can do, trap shooting, collecting, hunting, all of those things. The Canadian Shooting Sports Association has those resources for it. That's what an association's about. And you can communicate with other firearm owners, see where there's trade shows, things such as that. Also, of course, they lobby on your behalf. And as we see what's going on in the federal government, it's as important as ever. They're coming for the firearms. They don't want you to have them. This is an ideological push from Justin Trudeau, and we got to push back. So this is now more than ever. Seriously, get on there. You got to join these guys. This is for your own sake. Get a membership, because that's how they can afford to keep lobbying and pushing on your behalf. And it's not that much. And there's all sorts of other resources too. So get out there, CSSA-CILA.org, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, because guys, we're just not going to be doing well if we let them carry on like they have. Speaking of federal incompetence, let's look at some of this news. This gets a little personal with me too, not a giant deal, but it's saying you should send your complaints to members of parliament. Canadians now wait an average of 3 months to renew a passport. This happened to me just last, we're getting into last fall. I think it got to like 5 months. All I was doing was renewing. I brought in everything. I did everything right. I went into the office in person, and it was a pain. This was last year, so we had to be all masked up and sanitized, and it was hard to get there. But I wanted to make sure that, every T was crossed and every I dotted, and I got it in there. And still months and months, and phoning their 1-800 number, and they wouldn't give me answers, and run around. My vacation was coming up in January. I wanted to cross the border. My passport would have been expired. And actually, the way it got done, credit where it's due, I called John Barlow. He's my member of parliament. It's his office, and they responded on my behalf and actually reached out and inquired. They've got different phone numbers and different email addresses. They can get a hold where you can't. And within weeks, I had my passport. Like, These bureaucrats will just sit on it and sit on it and sit on it until a fire gets lit under their butt by somebody higher up. I mean, it shouldn't be taking months like this. God knows they've had nothing else to do for 2 years while they sat in lockdown working from home, paid in full. But either way, there's some good advice in that story. Just if you're like I was and you're waiting a long time, and this is something surprising, actually, good advice out of the minister saying contact your MP and that'll speed it up. I mean, you shouldn't have to. It shouldn't be what you need to do. The bottom line is you're a taxpayer. You're paying for that renewal. You should just get this done. And they should all be done in a decent period of time, but they haven't been. It's another one of those areas that the Liberals are just destroying us, though, is travel, inward and outward, I mean, that came up as well. I mean, there was a House motion. We saw that in the news, and it was just voted down completely on lifting the bloody travel restrictions, the vaccine. Come on, guys, why are you? Well, we know why. It's control. It's similar to the firearm legislation. They don't care about the actual outcome. It's intent. They just want to control. This is an authoritarian regime. There's no getting around that. This government loves control, all the way from the Emergencies Act to maintaining, being one of the only countries left in the world is maintaining these vaccine mandates for no legitimate scientific reason any longer. And it's costing us. So even if you aren't being able to travel outward, but that still costs us all. The inward travel, as I was relating earlier, when I went to the States a couple of weeks ago, I got across the border down south in minutes. Coming back, I had to wait an hour and change because we're busy scanning and checking and making sure everybody's vaccinated. It's ridiculous. And same sort of thing with these passports, like everything. We should not be hindering our citizens like this. This is Canada seeming more and more like a third world country every bloody day. This is not a complicated thing, especially this is passport renewals. We're not even talking about getting a new one. We're talking about somebody who's 5 or thankfully you can get a 10-year renewal, which I did because I don't want to go through that again for a long time. And you've got all the information there. You've proven who you are. I mean, I can get my driver's license renewed in a week. Why the hell is it taking these ding-dongs months and months to renew a bloody passport? Meanwhile, yeah, people are missing vacations. People are getting stressed. And yeah, it also says applicants who attempted to phone a 1-800 number, expect to wait up to 55 minutes. Yeah, I know. I did that last year. And I got no satisfaction. They gave me the runaround. And it said in February they were getting 50,000 calls a week. Well, maybe it's because you're idiots. Get the bloody job done. How much money is going towards you guys? Either way, if you're looking to travel, if you're looking to move, and I mean, obviously the government doesn't move fast on anything unless they want to move in on infringing on your rights. Get out there sooner rather than later and renew those passports because who knows how long it's going to take. So that's another part of advice there. Now, this is an interesting one, too. This is a Senate bill that's been sliding under the radar. It's S7. And this is, we talked briefly about that a little while ago, speaking again about privacy. Damn, I should have asked Matt about that one as well. I'm not sure if those guys have worked on this one, but it's kind of related. And this bill would give border guards the ability to search your cell phone. Force it, force you to give your password, your information to these officers, and without a warrant, without anything other than their suspicion that you might have something that they need to see. This is not again, yeah, as Pat's saying, the commenter, control, and that's what it is. It's control. Again, it's back to control. It's my personal item. A cell phone isn't like it used to be. It's not just something you dial, flip open, dial, and take a fuzzy picture with. This is your life's on there. Your credit card information's on there. Your personal communications are on there. Your family pictures are on there. And it should take a hell of a lot to bring in the ability for some bureaucrat, and that's still what the border guard is. It's a guarding one, but it's a civil servant. And to have them poking around in your phone on just a suspicion of anything, it's ridiculous. And a Liberal appointed senator, so let's give credit where it's due, called it out, actually likened it to a fascist measure that would promote racial profiling of all things. And Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino, the Minister of Lying, and I will always call him that because he has lied so many times, so bald-faced, and he really, really needs to be fired, this man. He just spouts out the lies the second he's asked anything. And of course, he's saying it's not a problem. It's a new legal threshold. No, it's a problem. It's a huge problem in your laptop, your tablets. You can have sensitive business information on there. I mean, I understand what they're saying because that's where they play to the emotions again and everything with their control. Well, what if it's got child porn on it? Well, do you have evidence that there's child porn on it? Because if there isn't, that's not enough reason to go in. I want to see these porn peddlers busted. Absolutely. It's disgusting. These are horrible people that should be locked up. But it doesn't mean you should have the ability to, at whim, suddenly go into people's personal space and start searching. I mean, child porn collectors probably keep it in their households as well. We don't want to empower the police to kick in every door in the country to look for it. They would probably find some, but for the most part, for the 99% of us who don't take part in that crap, we have our doors kicked in. Either way, this is another bill. Every bill out of this liberal government is trying to infringe your rights. They are obsessed with taking control. And people, you got to pay attention to these guys. I mean, I've been a political weenie and watcher for all of my adult life. And I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen a government so obsessed with infringing on individual rights and taking control of your life as this liberal government is. And they're continuing to be. Everything we keep talking about, C7, or no, this is S7, C11, C18, now this firearm bill, the Emergency Measures Act. Like, it just doesn't stop. We've got to be scared, guys. You will have no privacy if we let this government keep going. No privacy, no right. Can't move around. Either way, this was a liberal senator, and I've criticized the liberal senators. He was liberal appointed, and that's the term we're going to keep using, because Trudeau said it's they're independent now. They're not really part of. Oh, spare me. Watch Paula Simon's performance in there. Oh, she's liberal. Don't worry, guys. But all the same, credit where due. This David Richards from New Brunswick compared the bill to police tactics in fascist Spain. He says, I find this arbitrary and intrusive, and I don't think what you said today convinces me otherwise. And that's what he was saying to the Minister of Lying. Of course not. Anybody who listens to that minister knows about him. You can't be convinced anything he says. He's a liar, chronic liar. And he says, it's the same kind of searches I witnessed in Spain during Franco. Like, this is a fellow who's been there and seen it. Who gets to decide whom to search, and how in God's name can we ever be fair or impartial during these searches? But this is where the government's going, and they're ramrodding it through. Something that else that's unusual is they're putting it through in a Senate bill. You know, the government, Senate bills are difficult ones to get through. It's a convoluted way to get one done. It can certainly happen. Senate bills have been passed into law, but rarely. Often it's for virtue signaling, for getting something into committee. But in this case, this bill, this C7, looks like it might move the works. It'll still actually have to go to Parliament. But again, why? Why are they so eager to constantly get into our personal lives? So either way, it's getting some harsh criticism in the Senate, and I'm happy for that. Maybe that's part of the reason they're starting in the Senate and hoping to end in the Parliament, because they have a lot less control in Senate than they do in the Parliament right now. In Parliament, they've got the unholy alliance between Trudeau and Singh, so they can get stuff done and they get done fast. So maybe they're thinking we can rip off the Band-Aid with S7, get the harder discussion out of the way early in the bill, rather than getting it through Parliament and then having the public realize what's going on once it hits the Senate. This way, they'll have inoculated themselves a little. I don't know. But this trend is just continuing. Every motion this bloody government puts forward seems to be trying a little more to infringe on your privacy, infringe on your right to travel, infringe on your right to choose medical practices. It just doesn't stop. This is an obsessed government. And I'm getting more and more worried. I've never seen anything like this in my life. Getting onto virtue signaling and taking advantage of a catastrophe, and not in the case of the Liberals taking advantage of the American catastrophe. But we're talking about the residential school thing and this story. We're going to get onto that with Professor Flanagan. And again, we had him on a little while ago because now people are finally asking some questions. That's what I'm talking about too. We need more scrutiny of these things. We got to dig deeper and find out what's really happening. And as we dig deeper on this whole alleged graves being found on residential school sites, we're finding out that it's not quite what everybody thought it was when it first got rolling there. And the mainstream has finally picked up on it. You know, they were behind the curve, but they're finally jumping in. So let's bring Professor Flanagan in and discuss this a little further. I see him in the lobby there. Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Hi, Cory. Just give me a minute here to get. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, I'm doing well.
Good. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, we could pop you into the show pretty unexpectedly at times. So
that's okay.
No worries there. And I appreciate you just bringing it up because, you know, it took some pushing, it took some prodding on your part, on the part of Professor Rubenstein and the other one, Rouillard, getting out there and saying, look, you know, we've this whole thing that's been going on, there's a lot of pieces that don't fit, or there's a lot of discussion that's not happening, or a lot of assumptions are being made about what happened that aren't accurate. And finally, it seems to hit a tipping point, though, where we're having a public discussion on what actually happened with these residential schools and these burial sites.
Yeah, it's interesting how what we've been doing, a group of us have been digging into the issue and publishing our findings. At the beginning, we were pretty much frozen out of what you might call the legacy media or corporate media. We published in, let's call it alternative media, like Western Standard, True North, Dorchester Reviews. It's a small historical journal. And we published quite a bit of stuff, putting forth a different interpretation about the unmarked graves. Finally, last week, we had a bit of a breakthrough into the legacy media. There was a big spread in National Post. I expect many of your viewers have seen that, by Terry Glavin, front page, and not only front page, but several internal pages. I mean, much larger than any newspaper normally grants space to an author. So it was really quite a landmark. And in addition to that, there was coverage in the New York Post, which is the oldest newspaper in the United States, and in several Quebec newspapers. So it's a bit of a landmark for us in trying to broaden the discussion, and we hope there will be lots more.
Yeah, and I don't like driving too many of our viewers to other outlets, but that's okay. I mean, Glavin's piece was outstanding, and as you said, it's rare when you get such a long one, particularly in a print medium. I mean, that takes. I would imagine there was a lot of discussion before going into something that controversial and going that deep between the editors. Like, do we want to go there? Do we want to give him this much ink on this issue? And it's happy to see that they did.
Yeah, I'm sure it was discussed. It's also interesting that about a year ago, Mr. Glavin published a much shorter column about the findings in Kamloops, which took a sort of a conventional point of view that, yes, these were unmarked graves and wasn't it terrible, and on and on and on. So he's really reversed himself over the course of the year. He doesn't say why. Perhaps the publications of our group have had something to do with that. I don't care where it comes from, but the point is that now a different view of this is getting a wider audience, and I think that's terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we don't ever want to punish people for just admitting, even if he didn't go into the admitting he was wrong, but just changing the view. Hey, if he's changing correctly, then good on him. And as you said, maybe it was because of reading, and there was some stuff in the Dorchester Times as well that really dug into that a fair amount too.
Well, that's right. Professor Riard's article was a bit of a bombshell. I mean, it got, well, I haven't looked at the number recently, but at one time it was way over 100,000 hits for something published on, put up on the website of a fairly small circulation historical journal. It's absolutely unprecedented. And that showed that there was a hunger for getting the truth about these so-called unmarked graves. So we've been working on it ever since, and I think we're making a little progress. But the politicians are deeply invested in the story. I mean, the Prime Minister with his half-mast flags, and now he's got the Governor General talking about it as well. It's going to be hard for them to climb down because they have made such an ostentatious display of allegiance to a story for which there are, in fact, no supporting facts. I repeat, absolutely no facts. Not one burial has been found with all the hype and publicity. Ground penetrating radar has found some soil disturbances, which could conceivably be burials, particularly when they go looking in cemeteries. It's not surprising that they might come up with a burial, but absolutely no evidence that any of these are burials of so-called missing children. So it's I repeat, it's the biggest fake news story in my lifetime. Perhaps since the New York Times cover-up of the Holocaust in the Ukraine and this mass starvation in the Ukraine, I guess, was a bigger fake news story. But this is a big one.
Well, and a very socially damaging one. A lot of people took that to heart. And I mean, a lot of people were horrified if you read it on the surface when it initially was breaking. And if you believed that that's what was happening, that they were really abusing these children en masse and hiding the burials. I mean, it's mortifying. And correcting the record later, but a lot of the damage in trust and emotion and things has happened. Like, where do you go to start recovering from this?
No, I know what you mean, Cory. Tremendous damage has been done. First, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission accusing Canada of cultural genocide. And now with the claims about unmarked graves, it sort of moves into a literal physical genocide. And, unless you read these stories very carefully, they are horrifying. Now, if you read carefully, you start to see details that don't add up, like claims that 6-year-olds were rousted out of bed in the middle of the night to go dig graves, and that babies were thrown into furnaces, and the bodies were seen hanging on meat hooks in the barn. A lot of these details, they go beyond the unlikely into the realm of the virtually impossible. But not everybody researches stories that carefully, and how can they? People have busy lives and they look at the headlines. So yeah, tremendous harm has been done already.
Yeah, and anecdotal evidence, I mean, it really has to be examined, particularly when it's verbal and with such emotional matter. I mean, the people saying some of those stories might have heard them from somewhere and a friend of a friend, but that shouldn't be making newsprint unless you can verify things like that, something that horrific.
This for people with long memories, and maybe you have to be a little bit gray-haired for this, but remember the moral panic about daycare centers, and there was all kinds of testimony about awful sexual assaults taking place in daycare centers, and people went to jail for it. Fortunately, nobody was executed, and it all turned out to be complete nonsense. Overheated imaginations of children being asked leading questions. A lot of the details in these stories are actually reminiscent of the daycare center moral panics, and there are some. We haven't got time to explore it today, but there are some actual historical linkages between those stories and the ones that we hear now.
Well, and I think perhaps a little bit of both is what more emotional area can you get than the care and safety of your children? In both cases, it's something that really gets people fearful and empathizing. I mean, you can imagine if somebody else's child is abused, you're horrified as well on their behalf.
Yeah, absolutely, and you understand why people react to it. But when you look analytically at it, what's happening here is, so-called oral tradition. It's always, not somebody who saw these things, but somebody who talked to somebody who saw these things. It's that kind of testimony, which gets passed down and gets exaggerated. It's like the game of telephone where you whisper around a circle and the story keeps changing as it gets carried on. So, but to come back to the starting point here, I think what's really important is the complete irresponsibility of the corporate or legacy media, who picked up these stories as soon as they came out and started to run with them, and did not ask elementary questions that any good researcher would ask, like what is the factual evidence for these claims? The New York Times, for heaven's sake, supposed to be the leading newspaper in the world, published a story about mass graves in Kamloops. Exaggeration upon exaggeration, and these are supposed to be the leading parts of our news media. I mean, I say thank God for outlets like the Western Standard, which are not part of this. No, that's really I think the story for today is the complete irresponsibility of the legacy media on this story. Now, will they correct themselves? Self-correction is not a common feature of human beings, Cory. So none of us like to admit when we've been wrong, but they were absolutely wrong.
Yeah, well, and as Nico brought up, you saw when I've seen that image of one of the pastors we had from Professor Rubenstein, asking this was a few months ago. Why can't we find Canada's missing residential school students? And we published that, and it was well written and well sourced, and it did okay, But we also got some pushback, some negative emails saying, "Oh, you guys, you're trying to deny a tragedy," and otherwise it just didn't boom. I mean, some of the incentive for even smaller media outlets or bigger is the sensational, the horror is going to grab you the clicks, and it's so measurable now with digital that I think they feel inclined to they want to sensationalize the horror of this, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, the pushback is starting now in the legacy media. There was an editorial today in the Winnipeg Free Press, or not an editorial, but a guest column by Negan Sinclair, who's the son of Murray Sinclair. He's the younger Sinclair is a professor of Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba. But he embarrassed himself by going on a long rant, which has no factual content at all. It's political rather than professorial. He doesn't deal in logic and fact. It's a long exercise in name calling. I'm too old. I'm too white. et cetera, et cetera. It's really an embarrassment for somebody who's employed by the public as a professor to be putting out that kind of argument. But that kind of abuse is going to come. I think there will be a lot of pushback of that type. But we're going to keep plugging away and presenting fact and try and make yard by yard a little progress.
Well, and the facts are there. I mean, there was somewhere when I had Professor Rubenstein on this show before, and I had stated actually in a question saying, well, it must be hard, there couldn't be many records from the schools from back then and things like that. And he said, oh, no, it's very well documented where the children were, where they were transferred. And in fact, these schools, that's the way they got paid. If you didn't document who you had and where they were, even if you're just looking on the self-interest level, they had every interest in documenting it, and those documents still exist. We can find out who passed away where and where they were buried or who went home. There's no missing children.
Well, absolutely. I mean, to take one example, the claim is that possibly 200 or 215 unmarked graves were discovered at Kamloops. Well, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission itself compiled a list of 51 children who died while attending the school at Kamloops. But that's over a period of more than 100 years for the largest residential school in Canada. I mean, that's not a lot of fatalities. All deaths are sad, but in 100 years and at a time when there were no antibiotics and tuberculosis and other diseases were killers of children, it's not a huge total. Anyway, 51, not 200, 51 deaths were documented at the school. And death certificates are available for these children in the archives of the province of British Columbia. But the TRC didn't look there. So you get the implication that there's something wrong with these deaths. Well, the death certificate showed that what did they die of? Well, tuberculosis, tragically, sometimes runaways, got accidents. Most of them were sent back for burial to their home reserves. Again, contrary to what is often said. There are no missing children. They're all accounted for. The whole missing children thing is a fable based upon misuse or overlooking historical sources that are there. It's really a disgrace that the TRC spent so much public money and ended up generating so many legends without making proper use of sources that would have been readily available to it.
Yeah, and I mean, the investigation, even at the time, it was surprising out of journalism because, I mean, you still, to a degree, you want to get those scoops and things like that. Like with the famous, or you could almost call it infamous, picture of Trudeau kneeling with the teddy bear at a cemetery and his head down, and the photo opportunity. And that one was covered in Glavin's story as well. It was countered immediately. They're saying this is a known cemetery. There was nothing discovered here. This was all documented. Why didn't they counter Trudeau at the time? Say, dude, you're
Well, yeah, that's right. Many of the more responsible Indigenous leaders got out right away and said, look, these are cemeteries. Of course, you're going to find burials there, but they're not necessarily from a residential school. But, Mr. Trudeau, unfortunately, is impervious to facts, and he sees an opportunity to display emotion, and he takes advantage of it. So, and you can't blame citizens when they see their prime minister and the governor general pushing this story, and all the legacy media are pushing it, and Indigenous leaders are pushing it. You can't blame ordinary people for believing it. So we've got an uphill struggle here to get the facts out. But as I say, we do think we're making a little progress.
Yeah, well, people, themselves, your average people are busy. They're only going to research so far. They read the media so that theoretically they're getting information without having to do all that. That's supposed to be our job to get out there. So you're still working on this with some other individuals and digging into this?
Yes, we are. We're publishing wherever we can, sometimes in the alternative media. We'd love to break into the legacy media on this issue. We're still, I think, shut out. But Terry Glavin got in there. Now, Glavin has an advantage. He doesn't have the reputation of being a conservative. I don't know what his politics are. They're hard to pin down. But he certainly is kind of an independent. So I guess that gave him an advantage in telling the story. And I think that's great. That shows that this goes beyond. It's got nothing to do with ideology, really. It's not whether you're conservative or liberal. It's whether you are able to establish historical fact.
Yeah, Glavin has no political agenda, and that always does help in that case. And not to say that you do or Mr. Rouillard or anybody else, but yourself, you've been very politically involved in the past, and people could use that to claim that this is got some sort of political motivation. So, but again, the more voices getting it out there and basing it on fact, the better. So good to see you guys are still at it, and the cracks are showing in the legacy media. They're starting to accept this now.
Yeah, I think so. We'll see how it goes. It's not going to be easy. It never is. And there'll be a lot of abuse showered down on us along the way. But as I say, this is not really a political issue. It's a factual, historical issue. And I would hope that all people of intelligence and goodwill can agree upon historical evidence and historical fact, and can recognize fake news when they see it.
Well, I appreciate the work you've been doing, and the work you're going to carry on doing. I hope we can talk again soon as more information surfaces. Maybe we could it's going to take a while, but we can correct this wrong and maybe set an example so we don't see something like this happen again.
Okay. Well, thanks for looking into the story, Cory. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. That's Professor Tom Flanagan. And as we said, yes, he's done a lot on this along with some other professors, and they've been pushing, and it's a hard wall to hit. Getting it into, and hey, alternative media, we can get word out, whereas the legacy media won't at times, but you still need that legacy media. There's a whole lot of readers, viewers, and so on who just don't get there yet. So it was something this important, encountering the misinformation, as I said, damaging misinformation, need to push on that. Sylvia commenter was asking, didn't we just talk about this? I had Professor Flanagan on a couple of weeks ago. I'm thinking it might be. It's been a little while. But for me, usually I keep my guests at least a month apart. But still, this is still an ongoing issue and breaking. Plus, what was different this time, as you said, the New York Post covered it. The National Post covered it. These are major publications. This is getting to a whole new level of people, and we've got to keep it alive. What's the next myth that's going to divide Canadians up with again? After this one. What sort of government actions are going to be done on a fake news story? Because we've put the whole country on edge over this. We've dedicated incredible amounts of spending and investigations, and we really have, for the people who believe those stories, it really ripped into a lot of emotions for them. And if it turns out they're untrue, that this was very irresponsible. This was very damaging, and this is going to take a long time to correct. Some people might not believe the corrections. So let's correct this. And let's, again, see how we can stop this sort of hysteria from going. Like, that's what got me going with Glavin's piece, as he wrote on it. And he mentioned the chiefs and I believe a Catholic official saying, look, Trudeau was kneeling in a known graveyard. Anybody could do that. I could go to the Union Cemetery in Calgary and kneel with a teddy bear for a photo op. That's essentially what Trudeau did. This wasn't some new discovery. This wasn't a mass grave, as people put it. And nobody's saying that there's no graves down there. They're unmarked. That's unmarked. Again, if you remember, if you've been to old cemeteries, particularly ones with lower budgets, they usually were marked with a wooden cross. Well, after 80, 90 years, those crosses are gone. They degrade. They fall apart. Some people, we should exhume, I think, if we're going to be this serious about this, not all of them, but a number, and prove that there actually are, because some of these could be different types of anomalies in the GPR, but also dig into the records. Why was somebody buried in that spot? There were others that were exposed, that there was some cemeteries that have been labeled as unmarked cemeteries and discovered again in the First Nations made the news. And it turns out they were actually settlers. They were different groups of people altogether. It had nothing to do with residential schools. But we're getting all of this after the fact. It kind of reminds me of, when a newspaper blows something up really badly, a week later, somewhere way back in page 39, there's a little paragraph of a retraction. Oh, sorry about that. That was bullshit. We can't let it go. This was a big deal. Trudeau, invested a lot of capital on that. He kneeled on those things. He asked us all to weep. He lowered our Canadian flag for the first time in Canadian history for months. Months. He had to be pushed to rise it back up because he loved that national virtue signaling, that everywhere you went, you saw a flag at half-mast, because we're supposed to be ashamed of ourselves for being Canadian, and that this issue is supposedly real. So, we'll keep discussing it and keep working on these. Nobody, I don't think in their right mind is saying that the residential schools were a good idea, whether they were right. They were the right idea at the time, what they felt, sure. And I think there was actually some good intention behind, not good outcomes, good intention, or what they felt was good intention. It doesn't mean it's right. And it doesn't mean there wasn't abuse in those schools. It doesn't mean, I mean, we know predators and nasty people gravitate towards things like that, boarding schools, the church, things like that, where they can get unfettered access to unprotected children. It's happened. It happens outside of the residential schools as well. And I'm certain it's happened there as well. And that's awful. And we should investigate. And if anybody's still alive, we should hold them accountable. But at the same time, we can't expand what that whole thing is. Sylvia's saying we have several graves. We don't know who it is because the markers deteriorated years ago. It's a fact of life. Yeah. A side story, when I was working oil exploration up in upstate New York near a town near Norwich, and it's kind of mountainous, north end of the Appalachians. I was just talking to Jane about that the other day. We're using bush mulchers and a unit there to cut for a seismic line. So I get the call on the radio from the operator. He says, "Oh, you better come here." So what? And it's very thick bush out there. He had actually mulched through a number, and these were stone headstones. They're very degraded and worn down. He crushed up a couple of them, and once we started stomping through the bush, we found it at 12 or 14 by the time we were done. So I went to the landowner. I thought, "Oh my God, this is it. We're going to get just in horrific trouble here. This is probably his ancestors." And he said, "No, my father bought this place in the 50s. I never even heard about these things." Like, grave sites get forgotten. These were probably 200 or more years old, these ones. This guy didn't even know they were on his own property. The bush is really thick there. It doesn't mean they were hidden grave sites. Family plots were common. In that case, it was just the fact that they were stone headstones. We couldn't read the dates. They were that worn, but at least that we knew it was a cemetery. If it was wooden ones, we would have mulched right through and never known until perhaps we drilled and set some dynamite and pulled up some bones or something. But so let's get to the facts. Let's get to what's real. And let's report on these things before we do more damage with real fake news. Let's talk one more time about our sponsor. I did want to mention a little more about Bitcoin. Well, these guys, one of the other aspects that's important with them is with their education and with their services, what they do is they make Bitcoin practical. Because a lot of people think to yourself, well, what do I do with this stuff? I mean, fine, I got my wallet, my hot wallet, I've got my cold wallet, I've got my ledger, but is it practical? What can I do with it? Well, they do make it practical. They show how you can pay your utility bills with Bitcoin or other forms of payment. You could use it for payroll systems in your company, for benefits for employees. You have ATMs all across Canada where you can deposit your Bitcoin. All sorts of ways you can utilize it and make it practical, or sit on it. Use it as an investment. Use it as a hedge against government inflation or government seizure of your money. And it has its ups and downs in value. I'm not a financial advisor. I wouldn't tell you whether to buy into a lot or a little Bitcoin, but that's what these guys can help you. If you're looking to get into it, they will give you the facts on how to get into it, how you can safely get into it. And they're non-custodial. I always, like to mention that, which means they never hang on to your money. You got to watch it with these services. They never say, "Give us the money first and we'll buy your Bitcoin for you." Hang on. That's a big warning flag. They don't need your money. They will facilitate the process for you. They won't hang on to it. It's always in your hands. It's always safe. And you can see there's courses, Bitcoin for beginners, things like that. It's like anything. It's new. Educate yourself. Check it out. They're good, reliable, service, Alberta-based and Canadian company. So bitcoinwell.com, guys, check them out. Take control of your money. Sorry, I get distracted. I look at those comments because I like responding to it. I see Sylvia saying, "I'd rather someone show me how not have to pay my utility bills at all." Yeah, if I had the secret to that, I probably wouldn't have to come in here every day and work. Even I would be rich somewhere on an island, though I'd still like ranting at you from the island, perhaps. But all the same, we aren't at that point yet. But at least it's another way you could pay the ones you're stuck with. So let's go through a little more of the news. This was something I started ranting about earlier. Here's the full numbers of it, though. Yeah, when it came to the motion to drop the vaccine mandates, this just shows the futility of trying things in the House of Commons. Like I was saying, 202 voted against that motion, 117 voted for it. So, I mean, just a blowout. It wasn't even close. The Conservatives voted, yeah, and of course the Liberals, NDP, and Bloc Québécois, and the Greens, no, we want to keep these mandates forever, I guess. Canada's, Melissa Lanceman, she's really, it's ironic. She's been an effective member of Parliament and standing out, but really, I think out west, or most of us didn't really hear a lot about him until that imbecile Justin Trudeau accused her of being a Nazi, and she is very Jewish, and she's been a Jewish activist. It's not that hidden or anything like that. Their name is predominantly of Jewish origin. It was so insulting and so idiotic out of Trudeau, as are so many of his actions, that people were enraged. And either way, she's become a very effective member of Parliament. She's saying, Canada shouldn't be an outlier in the world. Let's do what other countries have done, drop these stupid mandates. They're costing us money. They're killing our tourism sector. So I'm glad she's trying to hold them to account. As you see, the vote numbers are no good. We can't seem to beat them on that front, but maybe at some point we can get rid of these idiots. Let's see, commenter Lynn saying, after the freezing accounts in Ottawa, how can you say digital currency is safe and secure? They can't get at, I know, they can't get to your Bitcoin wallet. They can't. The government has no access to it. That's the thing. If you're in a bank, you're in a regular bank, you're damn right they can get your money. But in Bitcoin, for example, if you get a ledger and other digital currencies too, I'm not a massive expert. I just know this because I have my own in that though. It's a data key with a 24 password thing. You'll see when you go into it. It's very secure and it's not plugged into the web. It's not recorded where they have it. It's on there. And that's why you gotta be careful, because if you lose that thing, you lose the password, it's gone. Okay. It's like a chunk of gold that's off to the side. If you lose it, you're out of luck. So it's a separate thing. And perhaps if you don't trust Bitcoin, there are other digital currencies, but look into those sorts of things. The government, I mean, they would love easy access to these things. Oh, I don't doubt it. And they're certainly trying, but they can't get your wallet or get at those things. They can't, as Calvin's saying, yeah, the government lied. They can't lock your wallet or take your digital assets. They want to, just because they want to, doesn't mean they can. Lynn saying a good hacker can get access. Well, a good hacker can also just clean you out on every other account. So again, you know, if you don't trust it, don't. It's fine. But nobody's digital currencies were taken by the government during that seizure. So it's one area, in my view, I feel comfortable in getting some funds away from the easy reach of the government. It doesn't mean it's impossible. Nothing's impossible, but it makes it a heck of a lot less likely. Very, very difficult. And as you're saying with the hacker, no hacker can get through to a cold wallet. It's not physically plugged into your computer. It's not there. They can't get to it. And as Lynn's saying, you know, you don't trust the government. I understand. I don't trust them either. And we've always got to watch for our things. We've got to watch for it. Not every digital currency is a safe investment or good. And as Calvin's kind of saying too, part of the responsibilities is we got to be careful with our information. Like that password scheme and everything you've got to do with your ledger is something else, a whole pile of words and everything. But if we mess up or leave it plugged in or write it all down and keep it next to the key, we could get in trouble. But it's another way to get your money. One way we know our money isn't safe, we know for sure, is in the bank. That we know. Okay, the bank capitulated, the government asked, and they seized the accounts of citizens during the truckers' convoy. That is distressing. So perhaps digital currencies aren't the solution out. That's fine. You know, go to precious metals or whatever you might want to do. But digital currencies are at least one of the hedges. Is Sylvia saying, yes, Scotiabank bowed and apologized. Too little, too late. We can't avoid banks yet, but we're getting farther and farther from it. And I find digital currencies might be a bit of the way there. Let's see some of the other stuff. I've been reaching out. You know, this is the second time. Another professor. I can't seem to get any of these professors to talk to us here. But this is on the wild boars in Alberta. And the story comes up now and periodically. So I tried to talk to the ones at UFC. I got no response. I've reached out to this one. Maybe they're just taking a while, but I get no response. But this is an ongoing thing. These wild pigs are really starting to breed. And they're coming around and they're getting into Alberta. They're getting into Saskatchewan. And people had better pay attention. Like I worked a lot in the southern states through Louisiana and Texas and New Mexico, Oklahoma. Those wild pigs are destructive and they are an epidemic down there. They just rip the crap out of the ground. If you're an agricultural producer and those things get into your field, I mean, they don't just eat a crop, they dig it to pieces. Pat, no, they did not raid digital currency. So just correcting that again before Calvin comes in for it. Again, the government lied. No, they didn't take digital currencies. Okay, so either way, yeah, Lamont, which is just west of Edmonton, getting out by Elk Island, those wild pigs are getting there, and they're smart. They're very difficult to get rid of, and it should be making bigger news, guys, because if these things get loose, I mean, Alberta, it's funny, we had a discussion around the standard offices. Some people forget and don't know that, but we're rat-free. We don't have rats in Alberta, and it's a purposeful. We're lucky. Up north, it's too cold. Out west, the mountains block them, and to the south to a degree. And to the east, we've got what's called the Rat Patrol. There are government guys paid for rat outbreaks because they come in. We have outbreaks. They do sneak in, but they immediately and mercilessly get in there and take that population down before they can entrench. So you got to start early. The only reason we got that way was because that Rat Patrol started early and eliminated rats and kept them out in Alberta from the first place. These pigs, there's nothing of that sort. They're doing some things. They got some bounties. They got some things going on, but not enough yet. We got to get them fast and early if we're going to possibly get them under control, because if they end up like they are with what I saw down in Texas and that. And see, it's not a matter of just being able to hunt these things or getting out there. Like the Texans are well armed. It's well populated. They're all over. That's how smart these things are. They got traps all over the place. From when I was working down there, you see the traps everywhere. They fly in helicopters and shoot at these things, but they breed like hell. They can eat anything, and they're smart. So once they've been shot at a couple times, they go into hiding. They don't come out until the night. And so again, the earlier we get on these things, the better. We better be paying attention. Knucklehead saying there's a ranch near Meyerthorpe that has Russian boars for custom hunting and processing. Yeah, there's those canned hunting and things like that. But doesn't know if any have ever escaped. Be interested to know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in this case, most of them in the States and up here, it's domestic ones that escape. And again, they're tough, smart animals, and they just carry on. And they turn in. So they aren't so much the wild boars, though we call them that a lot. They're most often the proper term is feral pigs. They've gotten loose and they're breeding, but they're all related. And they can also be terribly dangerous. They're strong. They got huge tusks on them. There was a case in Texas a little while back with a woman who got killed just outside of her house. Actually, that was just out east of Galveston. It's rare, but they will do it. And yeah, it's something to watch. Either way, more news to keep going. And if I can get that professor on, because I'd like to see what efforts are going to get these under control. Let's get him on here and talk about it. Let's see, the Upper Canada District School Board. Such a name, eh? The Eastern Laurentian elites, even their name sounds that way. Either way, they've now said that the book by Agatha Christie, And Then There Were None, is to be banned from schools. Here we go, we keep banning things because there were anti-Semitic references. And the truth is, there were some. They talked, one of the characters, this was written, you got to remember, in the 30s. And one of the characters, Mr. Morris, is referred to as Little Jew and having thick Semitic lips. Yeah, it's offensive. It's wrong. It's not good. But we don't use that language today. I see these as opportunities because, Christie's, mystery novels were brilliant literature. I loved reading those. And that was school reading for me. It was called 10 Little Indians still, I think, when I was in school. And they've changed it to And Then There Were None, because that was bad. And actually, the very original title was really bad. It was 10 little something with the N word. It's awful, and we don't use that word anymore. But I don't mind changing titles to get rid of some of that crap because the rest of the piece is good. We got to stop trying to read and judge our historical writers and people by the modern lens of what's tolerable. That's the problem. I see an opportunity to have students reading this book, enjoying the literature, but then when they get to those sections, that's where you discuss it. This is what was wrong with that book. This is why we don't refer to people like this anymore. This is how we've gotten better as a society. We've moved past that. We don't have that crap in our books. But the knee-jerk response is to ban it, to throw it out and get rid of it. That doesn't solve anything. That's not how we learn. Read it, because there's a lot of value within that book. Her writing was brilliant. But also call out the stuff that's now out of date and is offensive and wrong. And let's see. One of the things from Lynn there also saying, I may never understand crypto, one of our commenters. I'm with you. This is new and it's confusing. That Bitcoin mining idea and everything still, it gives me more gray hair when I try to understand even exactly how that works and all that stuff. I think some of it's past a certain point. I don't know what your age is. It's too hard to wrap around. It's just another thing. Again, as I say to our sponsor, though, just to throw it back, that's part of it. If you check out their site, they're very educational. They give a lot of background on what it is all about. So, here's another story, with the, I think this kind of came out before the new gun legislation from Trudeau got proposed. But this story was along that the cabinet admitted, failure with a pre-election bill allowing municipal handgun bans. Because that's what they're talking about. They were going to say, well, we'll just let city by city ban these guns. And, sorry, I got confused by the comment. I'm not touching that one, Lynn. But either way, now he's proposed his national freeze. Okay, so it's been since then, but they admitted it failed. But the problem is they have a failed policy to go after controlling guns, and what to say there. So they just doubled down, brought in another one, made it worse. So here we go with those things. So I just think, I'm sorry, Lynn, your comment's just hanging there. So, okay, she said railing on Ashkenazi Jews is not anti-Semitic. Calling them true Jews is like calling them KKK true Christians. All right, you know what? When you start with true this and true that, you're already being intolerant. And Ashkenazi Jews, for people who aren't familiar with it, there's Ashkenazi and there's Sephardic Jews. The Sephardic ones are the one you would typically see in Northern Africa or Israel, often with very Jewish appearances and genetically so. Some of the typical aspects of a darker skin or curly hair, things like that. But Ashkenazi Jews are real Jews, very much so. They're the ones who most often went into Europe, Russia, Germany, and throughout there and settled, and they still practice. Plus, it is, if you want to look it up, it can be tested genetically. There are genes that identify Ashkenazi Jews. It's not just a religious thing. They exist, and there is true a Jew as any other. Now, aside from that, I just don't want to get into those discussions on splitting on who's a true this or that or not. It's not good for any of us. And as well with those references in Christie's book, that's just a different thing. So yeah, either way, Trudeau, C21, we're going after these handguns. Yeah, we fail once, let's fail harder, right? Here's it, where it says Stats Canada in the 2018 report on firearms and violent crime in Canada said gun violence represents a small part of all crime in Canada in a given year. Like that's the thing too. Even with the illegal guns, it's not one of our bigger things. 4 out of 5 violent crimes, so 78%, didn't involve any type of weapon actually. And then there were more knives than guns when it did come down to a weapon. So he's not targeting where our problems really are. As I said in the earlier rant, it's the American culture wars. This is a separate issue. That's their issue. I mean, it's still real, and we still, we had that lunatic go off in Nova Scotia and murder all those people, and we've had the occasional school shooting. I mean, we've had Mark Lepine as well, and it happens, but it's not chronic here like that. And here's a quote out of Trudeau just to show the lies out of that himbo, where he said, gun violence is a complex problem. Okay, you got that much. But at the end of the day, the math is really quite simple, said Trudeau. The fewer guns in our communities, the safer everyone will be. That's what he said. Well, the math's not simple enough for you, you moron. This won't make fewer guns in the community. It's just going to take out there will be fewer legal guns in the community. The illegal guns are still going to be pouring in there. You were targeting the ones who weren't causing a problem, you idiot. But expecting him to understand that, Chris Gibson pointing out, is putting gun shops out of business. They can't absorb unsaleable inventory. Yeah, all of these, and I think there's thousands of them across Canada, stores that carried handguns, now can't sell those products. The government's already talked about it. Oh, they'll buy them back, because they know they're going to get sued if they don't do that at least. But the bottom line is, I talked about that before when it comes to government compensation and things like that. It's theft, guys. It's theft. And even if they pay you for it, when they take your property by force, it's theft. If you haven't given permission, they shouldn't have the right to take it, whether they pay you or not. All right. We got lots to cover tomorrow, and there'll be lots more to talk about. So I'm going to talk to Jeff Park with the Alberta Parents Union. They've been touring the province, and they're talking about a lot of things to improve schooling and things across Canada, across Alberta. I saw the left get really upset with it. How dare you use the name union? You're dirtying it. Oh, good on you. I'm glad. If you're ticking them off on that level, it's already good. So Jeff Park's going to come on. He's going to be in studio, talk to us. And then Kinga Zentner. She's with Guided Journeys Foundation. And we're going to talk about palliative care. They're trying to get a center set up in Alberta. And, it's important care for people during their last days. So it'll be something a little different, a little non-political on that one. But it's still important. And we'll, of course, be covering the news. And I'll have a rant of some sort and everything else, too. So thank you all for joining me today, guys. I appreciate it. And I'll see you all tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard.